You don't know, ain't that cute? I'm gonna bust your head, punk.
I don't want to hurt you.
For decades, the world saw Jean-Claude Van Damme as the muscles from Brussels, a martial arts legend and a Hollywood star. But what was he really like behind the scenes? His ex-wife, Darcy Lapier, is finally speaking up, giving us all a front-row seat view of Van Damme's life, and her revelations are nothing short of shocking. Darcy's intimate details will reshape everything we thought we knew about Van Damme. You won't want to miss this. From shocking confessions to hidden struggles, Darcy's story is one Hollywood never told you. A Hollywood dream that turned into a nightmare. Let's begin with an example. Say in the 1990s, Hollywood is buzzing with larger-than-life personalities, glittering events, and high-profile romances. Jean-Claude Van Damme was at his peak, and wherever you turned, his face stared down from billboards and movie theater posters. Still, there was one name, the drop-dead gorgeous model Darcy Lapier, that seemed to ring a bell and fit the mold of the Hollywood action star. Their romance began like so many Hollywood whirlwind romances, fast, furious, and wrapped in the trappings of celebrity life. At the time, Van Damme was coming straight off movies such as Kickboxer and Bloodsport, and the world knew his every move. Darcy was forging her path, talented and beautiful, much admired by many. This, to the outside world, seemed like the ultimate power couple, two stars in ascendance, hand in hand. As the saying goes, not all that glitters is gold. Behind those flashes of paparazzi cameras, beneath the luxury vacations, there was a crack that was forming beneath the surface in their relationship. Of course, they looked perfect together, him, the fearless fighter, and she, the glamorous queen, but what we didn't see was how fast things were going to unravel in private. Years later, Darcy would admit she was swept off her feet by Van Damme's charisma. Still, behind that, muscles and more, so much more, had to exist. Okay, so just how did this fairy tale get its start? In Hollywood, at a party, of course. Where else would stars go to meet other stars they fell in love with? Darcy said it all went down when he showed up at some party and saw her standing across the room. Just like an action hero, he swooped in, and before long, they were the talk of the town. Jean-Claude was head over heels in love with Darcy, showing her gifts and gestures of affection that only a Hollywood star could pull off. Luxurious trips, gourmet dining, and premier front-row seats became commonplace. It was the stuff of fairy tales, or so it seemed. But here is the thing. It would not take long for Darcy to find that living in the limelight was not quite as glamorous as one would think. The pressure of being with such a very famous person like Van Damme weighed heavily on her. Publicly scrutinized at every turn, their relationship was dissected by tabloids and whispered about behind closed doors. During those early days, though, Darcy smiled, believing love would conquer all. Or could it? That fairy tale romance they gave to the cameras masked a darker reality. Behind closed doors, Darcy started to notice a side of Van Damme that the public never saw, a side that wasn't the charming, romantic man she'd fallen for. Keep your ears open, because this is where this love story takes its twist. What seemed like a fairy tale to be was far from real when Darcy soon found out. Fame reveals Van Damme's darker side. Success changes anyone, but in the case of Van Damme, it wasn't just the spotlight that moved. Darcy Lapier describes a man captive to his success. With fame, according to her, came the worst in personal life and the best in his career. Behind the glamour and glitter of stardom, Jean-Claude, which the world idolized, started to crack. By the mid-90s, Van Damme was a household name for blockbusters full of action. However, living under that shadow wasn't an easy task for Darcy. She had to witness firsthand the pressures that came to keep that image of his going. The more famous he got, the further he went away. As Darcy has mentioned in her interviews, Jean-Claude's obsession with his career left little room for their romance. And that passion-filled romance? It started to crumble under the strain of long hours on set, constant travel, and endless fan adoration. But Darcy didn't stop there with his revelations. What none others could see were the erratic behaviors that came with Van Damme's sudden rise to fame. Darcy opens up about the temperamental side of Van Damme, one fueled by the pressure to stay atop. Not much different from the heavy weights he once lifted, the fame bestowed upon Van Damme proved a mixed blessing, one he silently carried. And that's where things get really interesting. Darcy witnessed behavior she says went beyond the usual stress of stardom. There were moments, she recalls, where Van Damme seemed to lose control. From mood swings to unexplained absences, Darcy began to question who this man she married truly was. Was it the Van Damme that the public adored, or was there a more troubled figure behind that Hollywood persona? Many have wondered why, after all these years, Darcy waited so long to speak up. Was she protecting him herself, or perhaps both? With today's hindsight, Darcy agrees that staying in the relationship was like living on a knife's edge. One minute, he would be the charming, affectionate man she fell in love with. The next, he'd be aloof and disconnected. What drove such duality in his behavior? Darcy alluded to deeper issues, those the very public never saw. But here's where things get even better. These erratic behaviors were only the tip of the iceberg. As Darcy would soon find out, the man behind the Hollywood star had even more hidden beneath the surface. The fame, the fortune, and the glamorous life all came at a steep price, one that Darcy wasn't prepared to pay. But this was only the beginning of her struggles with the action star. There's more to come, and trust me, the truth is even darker than what we've revealed so far. The betrayals Darcy couldn't ignore. Though we know, like every other marriage, ups and downs occur, but Darcy Lapier never thought that this marriage would have disappointments embroidered. While the world idolized Jean-Claude Van Damme, Darcy was indeed into quite a different world. Behind the curtains of red carpet events and glamorous photo ops, the wedding was being torn apart by infidelity. This man, whom she thought had committed to her, hid affairs. Not one affair, but many. And as Darcy later revealed, the truth was far worse than any Hollywood script could have penned. These were not infidelities of Van Damme that people talked about behind closed doors. They were real betrayals, quite undeniable, which Darcy could not ignore. She remembers everything seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. It was at first subtle, a late-night phone call here, a suspicious glance there, but soon the signs were just too glaringly obvious to sweep aside. Jean-Claude wasn't only a heartthrob to millions of fans, but was turning out perilously charming to women off-screen as well. But the most gut-wrenching moment for Darcy wasn't just finding out her husband had strayed, it was finding out the deeper level of his deceit. Darcy talks about how she tried to confront him and how she hoped that maybe, just maybe, there was some kind of way they could salvage their marriage. But once the trust is broken, the saying goes, it's very hard to fix. And in Darcy's case, it wasn't just a crack, it was shattered beyond recognition. But the real shocker is, nobody knew. The tabloids buzzed with speculation. Nobody actually knew what really happened until today. Darcy stayed mum all these years, keeping her painful heartbreak away from prying eyes. She suffered alone the pain of his betrayal, watching Van Damme as he continued to bask in the limelight of Hollywood. What then drove Jean-Claude to such actions? The pressure of fame? A need for validation? According to Darcy, his ego, which had begun to feed off stardom, played a big role. He loved the attention too much. It became another kind of addiction, one that fed his need to have everyone want him, even at the cost of his marriage. But here is where things get really interesting. Confronting him, Darcy did what no one expected. She didn't just walk away. She dug deeper and found some secrets that would make any person doubt everything they thought they knew about the action star. What does she find out? Hang on to your hat. What Darcy found out next shook their already shaky marriage. Addiction behind the fame. As if the betrayal wasn't enough, Darcy soon learned that Jean-Claude Van Damme was fighting demons far beyond infidelity. Addiction had taken hold of the martial arts star in the shadow of his illustrious Hollywood lifestyle. Darcy's revelations about Van Damme and substance abuse show a side of him the world has never known. For many years, people idolized Van Damme because of his physique, but behind the hulking mass of muscles and sinew, he was quietly tearing himself apart through addiction. The drug use of Van Damme didn't affect only his health, but rather started to unwind everything that surrounded him, even his marriage. Darcy draws a clear picture of a man who constantly stood on the brink of losing his nerve. One moment he was this Jean-Claude she fell in love with, this charming, charismatic actor, but the next, lost to himself, consumed by a need neither fame nor fortune could satisfy. The pressures of Hollywood, coupled with the already volatile personality of Van Damme, made for a dangerous cocktail. According to Darcy, many of their marital problems seemed to have addiction at the wheel. Late nights turned into early mornings as the drug use of Van Damme spiraled out of control. The very fame which once elevated him to superstardom now seemed his downfall. Darcy remembers that in his heyday, Jean-Claude used to balance action movies by day with other dangerous habits at night. But it wasn't just the addiction that tore their relationship apart. It was the lies. Darcy then shares how Van Damme's deceit didn't stop with his infidelities, where he actually lied about using drugs, placing her in a situation wherein she feels she lives with a stranger. She didn't know who to trust, and with each passing day, it was as if the man she married slipped further away. What's even sadder is that the addiction of Van Damme was not just sending his marriage down the drain, it was threatening to end totally his career. Behind closed doors, the star started using drugs on the job. The directors started to show their concerns, the producers whispered about it, and Darcy helplessly watched him damage a future that once had such promise. The addiction that came so close to destroying his career tore their relationship apart piece by piece. But here's the kicker. Despite everything, despite the lies, the betrayal, the addiction, there was one moment in their marriage that still shocks Darcy to this day. A moment when she realized that Jean-Claude's battle with addiction wasn't just his own, it was something they were both fighting. Well, what was it? What was the next thing that happened that just left Darcy speechless? Well, stick around because the truth is way more unbelievable than you might have thought. What Darcy found out would change her thinking about Van Damme forever, and it's one revelation which might well leave you in shock too, living in the shadow of a star. It would seemingly be some sort of dream to be a wife to an international superstar, but for Darcy Lapier, it was quite unglamorous. Just imagine standing beside one of Hollywood's hottest action stars and feeling invisible. While the world was oohing and aahing over Jean-Claude Van Damme's roundhouse kicks and heart-stopping action sequences, Darcy quietly existed in the shadows, her identity swallowed by his more-than-life persona. Intoxicating it was, this life in the glitz and glamour, but not all that glitters is gold. Darcy has spoken out now about the darker side. While Jean-Claude was lapping up the adoration of millions, Darcy was fighting her battles. Her pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical and financial too. The constant demands of being Van Damme's wife took their toll. The blinding flash of cameras, the unending tabloids, all combined to make Darcy's life one big whirlwind beyond her control. But it was the emotional baggage that turned out to be even more heavyweight. How do you have a competition with a man worshipped by the whole world? Darcy equally agreed in interviews that marrying a star came with having to sacrifice one's ambitions. She wasn't just Mrs. Van Damme, she was supposed to play wifey, the woman behind the action hero, even when it tore at her gut. And tear at her gut it did. It was the infidelities, the lies, the addictions. Those were her private battles. But what the world never saw was how alone she felt standing next to a man whose fame eclipsed everything around him. But that is not the end of the story. Darcy was not about to give up just yet. She held on, literally, to the marriage, believing that beneath the fame, the real Jean-Claude was still there, the man she had fallen in love with. But living in his shadow was silently killing her sense of self. It was no longer a matter of surviving his fame, but of surviving in a world where her voice had long been silenced, when private pain becomes public. It never happened silently in Hollywood, but the dissolution of Van Damme and Lapier was explosive. The marriage was picture-perfect to a viewing world, while behind the scenes, the very relationships were falling apart faster than anyone would believe. It didn't just hit the headlines about their split, it devoured it. Tabloids had a field day with all the jaw-dropping, painful details on full display to be pored over by the world. Darcy remembers how paralyzing the feeling was when the most private moments of her life made it to the front page. The headlines had screamed of betrayal, addiction, and bitter legal battles. But what went on behind the scenes was far uglier than anyone ever saw. To Darcy, the divorce wasn't just a formality. It was a fight for her dignity, her voice, and her future. Then there were the aggressive lawyers for Jean-Claude and the public. Well, they had already picked a side. The muscles from Brussels was still their hero, and Darcy? She was just another scorned ex-wife, or so they thought. The money and assets were just part of it. It was about control. Darcy now opens up about how the divorce proceedings became a battle for survival. She fought not just for a settlement, but for her sanity amidst the chaos. With each court appearance, the media circled vulture-like, ready to grab the next juicy headline. What most of them never knew, however, was how hard Darcy tried to keep things out of the public eye. She wanted to handle it quietly, to preserve some semblance of privacy, but Jean-Claude's stardom made that impossible. But here's the kicker. Through it all, Darcy stayed mostly silent. Why? Why would she choose to stay quiet during one of the most painful times in her life? For years it was a question that followed her, and now for the first time, Darcy is revealing the real reason she held back. Until now. A new chapter unfolds for Darcy. Darcy Lapier is not the woman standing in the shadow of a Hollywood giant anymore. Today she has embraced a new chapter in her life, harnessed by her will and not by the man she once called husband. But how did she break herself free from the web of fame, betrayal, and heartbreak that once engulfed her? The transformation story of Darcy is as fascinating as the drama surrounding her marriage. The years following her high-profile divorce, Darcy retreated from the relentless glare of the spotlight. Was it easy to do? Could it be, after all she endured? Tabloids, public spectacle, whispered conversations behind her back. It was all too much. But in one thing, Darcy found her solace, her strength. She had been through the fire, and while it almost destroyed her, at the same time it forged her into someone harder, strong, resilient, and infinitely wiser. Today, Darcy is not defined by Jean-Claude Van Damme or their tumultuous relationship. She's her own woman who carves out her path in a world that once tried to reduce her to just a mere footnote in someone else's story. The life she leads is certainly more subdued, but it is not any less rewarding. Years and years have gone into rebuilding herself brick by brick, never allowing her past to define her future. And now, Darcy is ready to speak out, not with the intent of afflicting bitterness, but to tell her own story. But here's everybody's question. After all she has been put through, are there any feelings left for that guy who profoundly changed her life? Recently, Darcy's have been candid and diplomatic in interviews. She realizes that she has moved on, but she will never take away what Van Damme brought into her life. After all, they shared some real good moments, and she was one of those who does not forget good things easily. But then again, as Darcy has put it, those were just moments she had learned to live with, yet not be swallowed by. She has said time and again that her story is not one of heartbreak but of empowerment. It's a testament that even from the deepest of betrayals, you can find your way back. Where headlines once carried the pain of Darcy, it is her victory that defines her today. Darcy Lapier is a real-life case proving that one's past is not always the predictor of their future. Now she is much stronger, wiser, and more determined to live her truth without holding anything back. Darcy Lapier's revelations have painted a different picture of Jean-Claude Van Damme than the one we're used to. Her story sheds light on the harsh realities of fame, love, and betrayal in Hollywood. But this isn't just about the past. It's about moving forward and reclaiming your narrative. So what's next for Darcy? Only time will tell. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe to our channel for more exclusive updates.